Great. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's a busy time of year right now with planning going on, everybody getting ready for H2 plans. For those of you that are in the middle of that process, we're rapidly approaching the second half of the year. I'm Michael Tannenbaum. I am the COO and CFO at Brex. I'm joined today by a number of folks that I respect and admire and have worked with some previously. Dan Westgarth, COO at Deel, Teddy Collins, VP Corporate Finance at SeatGeek, and Josh McLeod, Operations Manager at Prisma. And it's great to have Dan alongside me today, representing another tool that really helps global workforces with their financial operations, being Deel, as well as Teddy and Josh, who both represent customers of these two software programs. And we're here to kind of talk to you today a little bit more about how these teams are enabling tools like Brex and Deel and just managing the challenges of global workforces in particular, and how that's gone and sort of what our best practices. I think that for some context on this environment and also Brex, specifically, as the remote world started or sort of gained steam in what was the pandemic, you started to have companies like all the ones represented on the phone today, on the call, start to hire people outside of their headquarters. And then I think as the businesses started to expand and remote and hybrid work became more normalized, start to actually look abroad and say, well, how can we tap the global workforce and global costs and global talent to execute our plans more broadly? And so Brex is one of those tools, and we are the first unified spend platform that increases compliance, reduces friction, and does all this globally, right? So we're enabling expense management and expense tracking and budgeting across corporate cards, across travel, and doing that in a very native way across a number of different countries, with reimbursements in over 100. So I think that's been, a consistent message I've heard from customers, and obviously Teddy and Josh are going to talk more about it, but just the challenges of unifying an employee experience in multiple geographies and trying to manage expenses and enable and empower employees in different geographies with tools is something that I think Brex has really risen to the occasion for, given the environment. As I mentioned, I have Dan with me today, and he's going to talk also a little bit more about kind of Deel and how they work across the same set of challenges, but solving it from a little bit different perspective on the human resources side. So Dan, I'll let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about Deel before, of course, we get to Teddy and Josh and talk more about their experiences.
Hey everyone, thanks Michael for the kind intro. So the fundamental purpose of Deel is to help companies hire, manage, and pay a global workforce. So pre-Deel, we saw companies that were hiring cross-border use several to many different systems. These systems were usually regionally specific. So maybe you would have one system for LATAM, one system for Europe, one system for APAC, and those systems weren't really tech first. They were probably running off of spreadsheets and emails in the back. So we built Deel, this kind of all-in-one HR platform for global teams, and we've had a pretty cool story over the last 4 years, and we have some amazing clients. Revolut's my favorite because it's my ex company and my previous employer. Also like Nike because they make really cool running shoes. And we have a pretty good internal trust system that I want to talk a little bit about. We take customer trust very seriously, and that's why I take great kind of pride in showing off our Trustpilot score, G2 score, and ranking some other leaderboards. So any trust detractor, which is a kind of negative review or a negative CSAT, goes into our trust system. I actually review every single trust detractor and follow up with the customers as needed. And those trust detractors are represented as risks on our internal system. So we're going through those internal risks and remediating the root cause to make Deel an ever stronger platform to deliver on that mission. Yeah. So that's a little bit about us. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, please.
Sure. Well, so I think with that, it would be helpful, Josh and Teddy, if you both could introduce yourselves, and in doing so, just talk a little bit about the companies that you represent, the financial operations, the employee base, and why a global both expense management platform like Brex, as well as an employee management program like Deel, why those are relevant to what you do, and then we can sort of take it from there. If you want to start, Josh.
Sure. Yeah, so Prisma is about, I think, just under 50 people right now. And we grew a lot during the pandemic, kind of all over the place. To be honest, at the beginning, everything was a bit chaotic. You set up in different countries, and then to try and align things at a later date can be an incredibly difficult process. But we figured that all out. And yeah, a large part of it has been tools like Brex and Deel.
Helpful. And could you just describe maybe some of the countries that you're operating in?
Yeah, sorry. So our key countries are the US and Germany, with the majority of our employees and contractors dotted throughout Europe. But we have another, I think, 18 countries total around the world. Off the top of my head,
Wow.
I couldn't say it to you.
Helpful, thank you. And Teddy, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name's Teddy Collins. I'm the VP of Corporate Finance at SeatGeek. At SeatGeek, we help build the technology that powers the live entertainment industry, kind of serving you the best tickets in a mobile-first environment. We're customers of both Deel and Brex, and we're a global workforce. We have over 800 workers. We have kind of 3 home bases in the United States, United Kingdom, and Israel, but Deel helps us kind of employ our global employment strategy. We want to find the best people wherever they may be. And then we have over 10 other countries where we don't have offices. I'd say of our workforce, about the majority of the workforce categorizes themselves as remote. So that's kind of a new paradigm shift that's happened over the last few years. And Deel and then Brex also kind of helps us do a few things. I'd say it's helped us give a lot more transparency to our employees on what their budgets are, what their spend is, actually increase compliance, but also on the same side of that coin, reduce the overall overhead of managing our spend environment. So we want to be very efficient. We want to partner with great companies that helps us navigate the complex regulatory and compliance environments on employing people. And yeah, things have gone very well with both of the partnerships for us.
Helpful. Thank you so much. And then I know just for some context on Brex, because similar to Deel, and I'll let Dan talk about his setup, we obviously live kind of our product as well. And we have offices, we started prior to the pandemic. I actually moved to New York to open our New York office before we had become a hybrid company. We had decided to have kind of 4 main focus cities in the country, one of which was actually in Canada. So we were sort of operating this way back in 2019. And then now we also have pretty meaningful operations in Brazil, where our founders are from, Israel, similarly, and as well as other countries in Latin America. And so for us, I think the problem that I've identified firsthand is that, it's very important to us that we have an employee experience that is consistent across these countries. And moreover, that people can spend money easily, they can be hired quickly. We're respecting the compliance requirements from both a hiring and financial services perspective in those geographies. And it really feels like, if you're going to leverage global talent, you want it to feel like one company. And I think the tools, both from an HR and finance perspective, are very much a part of that experience. And so that's been really core to what Brex is focused on. But Dan, please add anything from your perspective.
I mean, totally. The product, we want it to be a very consistent employee experience, no matter where a company is hiring someone. But in reality, it's a very inconsistent experience. And it's about setting expectations between employer and employee. And I can give you some examples. Like, let's take Brazil as one, and then let's go to Israel, and let's go to Poland. So Brazil, one of the local nuances is every employee has to complete a medical check before they can start work. And how do you communicate that to a company like Brex in the US, or another company which doesn't have experience in Brazil? It's pretty hard. In Israel, the pay slips have to be in Hebrew. Now, how do you translate that in a platform so company from another country is able to see what's going on? And then I think I said Poland, but I'm going to switch to Egypt. In Egypt, we have to certify that the employees completed mandatory military service. So country by country, the operations are highly variable. And what Deel does is productizes all of that, brings it onto platform, and then makes a consistent experience for the employees and for the employer.
Got it. And so I think Josh and Teddy, it would be helpful to hear from you both if, when you're, from your perspective, when you're thinking about expanding globally, what's top of mind? What are the concerns? What are the challenges, that you guys were facing, or that you think other companies might be facing as they think through these challenges? If you want to start, Josh.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the number one thing that I always say to people who I know are expanding globally is find people on the ground who you can trust. You never know when you're going to face a difficult question, whether that's a regulatory question or an employee question, and you're going to have someone who knows the local rules who can help you at least navigate that. Or I don't know, maybe someone has to send a fax to the Ohio Department of Revenue at 6 in the morning, wherever you are, right? These sort of things happen, and it's highly beneficial to have people who can navigate that sort of thing. Along with that, it helps a lot to have a centralized system. So often people will expand into other countries and things will be decentralized, the management of things. And that's just always a pain point later to try and unify everything. So it's important to identify the appropriate global solutions for yourself early on in the process of expanding globally.
Got it.
Those are my two things.
Yeah, so I would say at SeatGeek, I think a lot about scalable systems and processes. When I joined SeatGeek back in 2015, we were under 100 people. We used a product similar to Deel back then, where from an employer of record perspective, it just makes sense up to a certain point, especially when you have employees across many states, to partner with an organization like Deel to take all of that back end and HR off of your plate, so you can focus on growing your company and revenue. And we ended up doing a partnership that turned into an acquisition that turned us global pretty much overnight, from a US based operation to having offices in multiple other countries, different currencies, functional currencies, local currencies. And we really had to upgrade our systems and think about where we wanted to go over the following decades. And I think SeatGeek, we really set up to take on some pretty large competition, and we were really thinking big about being a big company, that we need scalable enterprise systems and scalable processes. So think about where you are, but also where you want to be, because you can build awesome tools around a US dollar currency system that has all the bells and whistles. But if you, as you think about go to market, going international, launching new products, can the systems kind of travel with you? And one thing that's been great about Brex, before we had a few different disparate expense management, spend management tools, where we had 4 people in a certain country that used a certain tool, another ones that used another one. And I think what Brex is able to do is launch dozens of currencies, have a kind of great, I think, consumer grade UX UI experience, where we can have a similar experience across the global employee base and offer the same services for everyone. So when we have a employee stipend or something, we want to people enjoy the event and give them access to a certain amount of funds, it can be automatic across the global workforce. And that's been great. And then also staying very compliant. We run multiple books in our ERP system, having no spreadsheets involved, great API connections to our other upstream, downstream systems has been very important for us.
Totally. That, really helpful. Thank you, Teddy. I think one of the things that you said, which is this concept of starting smaller and growing, which I think is very common, of course, in tech companies, not necessarily outside of tech, but still, there's lots of rapidly growing companies all over. But what I think it speaks to is this idea that, the tools that you implement by their nature, at least for global operations, have to be flexible, because in many cases you're working with a much smaller overseas office, or even if there is no office, you're working with, say, a couple people in a small geography. And so a lot of times you'll hear someone, let's just say you join like a group of people, like I know our Israel office, they think of themselves in some ways as like a startup within a startup, and nothing's more stifling than giving these people who are just trying to get a country off the ground some sort of like heavy overhead process and tools. And so it's a challenge, and Dan, you should comment as well, but I think one of the things Brex does really well is, look, our DNA, we started in startups, right? And so we know what it's like to serve a company that is small and doesn't want a ton of process, but at the same time we also know how to serve a large company like SeatGeek, right, or even frankly Deel, or Prisma, right, where you have these sort of larger needs, and you have enterprise style privacy needs and compliance and all the things that happen as your company gets larger. But at the same time, the user experience has to still feel like that of a nimble startup and something that people want to use. And you're not just joining this like monolith from another country that has these backward tools. And so that's definitely very core to Brex and kind of the way that we built the product. But also, Dan, I know that that's relevant for you as well. So would love to hear your thoughts there.
Totally. I mean, if we look at the HR stack and we think about monolith, the HR stack of many international companies is just pieces of very old and outdated tooling. And then you zoom in on one of the international offices you set up, in your case, Israel, and you think about how they have to operate within that tool set, and it makes it incredibly difficult for them. And they feel like they're playing on a different playing field, right? And then it's hard to think and build that mentality and build those systems of recognition within your company if you have people on completely different systems. And it's as simple as stuff like looking in the directory. And maybe I want to look and see exactly where Michael is in the world. Like look at his address, or look at his time zone. Or maybe
Don't get too close to me, Dan. We don't know each other that well. You don't get my address just yet.
Okay, but location, somebody in the satellite office, they're in, maybe it's a larger country than Israel, maybe it's somewhere in Brazil or Asia, and you want to find exactly where someone is for operational purposes, and they're a completely separate system. Like they're really quite alien to you, and that's why I think breaking down the monolith of very fragmented systems is super important for companies that want to do international really well. That's what we built at Deel. We started off with contractor payroll. We then moved into the employer of record space, and now we're holding ourselves out as a global HR company. It's exactly what we are. We're one system of record for all of your HR needs, no matter where your workforce is.
Makes sense. Totally. So next question I'd like to hear more from Josh and Teddy about is just when you're thinking about vendors, and it doesn't have to be just expense management like your experience with Brex, or HR and onboarding with your experience with Deel, but just broadly as you both are operating in globally, and you're making financial operations decisions globally, has that become a key criteria for how you evaluate software? Is it only in this sphere? How did you kind of think about that, and how do you think about that going forward? If you want to start there, Josh.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, especially since COVID, if you cannot provide a global solution, your solution will not even be considered. We're at that stage right now where that's what you need to be to hire a competitive workforce. And if you want a unified tool, then yeah, you have to have a global solution.
Got it.
Definitely kind of last year, we were kind of evaluating both our HR systems as well as financial operations. And when both were taken from a perspective of how can we increase efficiency from a kind of financial and kind of human capital operations perspective. And I think, I appreciate Michael, you calling us a large company before. I think in the scheme of other companies with tens of thousands of people, we certainly aspire to be that. But we all want to kind of create scalable systems as we grow into a multi-thousand person company. The things you can get away with and doing from bottoms up manual processes from 0 to 300 people. Things start breaking. Things start breaking at 500 people, and things start breaking again at 1,000 people. And the tools, there's a plethora of tools that really cover SMB, small medium businesses really well, that really work well, that do a lot of the same things. But when what we're looking for of kind of layering the security aspect, integrating its SSO, automatic provisioning and deprovisioning, notifications to other systems. We have SOC 1, SOC 2 compliance, SOX compliance, things like that. That really, Brex in particular was able to kind of shine across the robust 10 other companies that we took a look at when deciding on our spend management solution. And the same thing on the deal side, where we talked to many other providers, but they did everything but this, these countries, or this, they couldn't. Things that other companies said we can't do that. Deal was the one that said yes, we can do that. We do this for other companies, and that really pushed them over the edge for us.
Yeah, helpful to hear that perspective. And I think this the some of the topics that you mentioned around SOC compliance, SOC compliance, and just kind of even IT infrastructure. I think managing all that. It as a company building a product, which Dan could also comment on, those challenges become even more manifest as you start to operate in multiple geographies. Because while folks on this call, folks that are talking today, we're a lot of us are operating kind of in the U.S. centric framework, and the reality is that each country or group of countries has their own approach on privacy, as we know, which is a big challenge, has their own approach on data security. And so when you want to operate across these geographies, and you're thinking from our seats, right, seats as finance and operations leaders who are making decisions about how we're going to use tools, we need to make sure that those tools understand that nuance. And it's not just about money movement or compliance from an employee regulation perspective or an employment law perspective in Dan's case, but it's also just operating as a tech company in all these different geographies, which is just something that as a decision maker, you need to really be focused on and make sure, because a lot of companies promise a lot of things, and with global, you just have to you find yourself having to be an expert in some ways in that many more geographies and that many more privacy regimes. And so it's a real challenge from the security and legal and compliance perspective as well. And so that's definitely something that I know for Brex, we pride ourselves on, and try to make it so that our customers can feel comfortable that we've taken those steps in advance. And so, Dan, anything you'd add there? Otherwise, I'd like to talk a little bit more about payment operations and entities, and sort of some of the nitty gritty that I think will be really helpful for folks to understand about actually setting up business overseas. And then, of course, having Josh and Teddy chime in as well.
Yeah, I think before we go there, just to double down on the word focus, going international is a real strain on a company's focus, and the organizational design used in going global is more important than other areas of the business. You might think of how do you set up your product org, how do you set up your operations org, what's the span of control of the people, what's the reporting line, how are they incentivized, how do they get recognition? If you do that on a kind of functional level, it's one story. If you do it on a global level across different geographies, it's a completely different story. And getting that organizational design that really works for the business and allows people to get work done quickly is a huge challenge for businesses.
Makes sense. Definitely. Totally agree with you. So shifting gears a bit, it would be helpful just for you, Dan, I think, to talk about more tactically some of, you have experience managing payment operations for Deel. You've got 2,000 plus employees, 100 different geographies. So, what are some of your learnings from scaling those operations globally? What's your advice around that, financial operations wise, entity wise? What would you tell folks sitting in your seat trying to do the same thing? Probably not to that extreme, although commendable, but just getting started in a few different geographies.
Okay, so I'll go backwards. I'll start speaking about operating at scale, and then maybe we'll cover setting up as well. So I think when operating at scale on an international level, it's really important to separate run the business from change the business. And what that means is you have a team of people which wake up every day and they do work that keeps the business running. They might be doing things like KYC, they might be doing things like payment operations. The point is they turn up every day to run the business and keep the business moving. Then in a separate team or department, you should have a change the business folks. These folks are working on product management, operations, strategy, and they're constantly working to make the business more efficient and better. And that has been part of our secret sauce of our international model. We separate those two things very clearly. I think when it comes to setting up cross-border is typically super expensive and quite daunting. Typically, you're going to need a lawyer. That's the first thing you're going to need to do. You're going to need an attorney to represent you and set up a subsidiary in that country. You need to have a legal presence to be able to pay people. You need to have a legal presence to be able to pay the local tax authority for any services or products you sell in that market. And it all starts with the entity. So you have an entity, you have a lawyer, you probably need some people. You probably need a general manager. You probably need an in-country CFO or country finance manager. You probably need a HR manager. You need a payroll manager. And this is all before you're actually doing anything. So the overhead of setting up in a country and being compliant is very high. I think this is where Deel has come in and added a lot of value for companies. Through our contractor model and through our EOR model, we do all of that for you and sell it to you as a service. And then when you're big enough and you have a big enough presence in that country and you have enough employees and you've made all those critical hires and you have your own entity, we can then transfer you to your own entity and we'll run your payroll for you. We'll help you set up the best benefits. We'll help you administer those benefits and all of that good stuff. So we can help companies go internationally much quicker without such a large upfront commitment.
Helpful. Thank you. Josh or Teddy, any reactions to what Dan said or anything that spoke to your experience, either being similar or different?
Yeah, I'd say jumping in, just kind of the overall theme of kind of going international is that while our headquarters are in New York City, I think the other places, still want to, feel like, their voices are being heard, and we're fashioning our products and processes to fit all geographies. And just kind of one specific example of new hires come into the SeatGeek, they get their laptops and all the accessories and so on, but there's an additional $500 stipend to kind of supplement the work from home experience. And just the tweak of providing the new Israeli shekel equivalent, or Israel folks, we could do Brazil, I did Romania, other items, and have those provisioned automatically, kind of in a rules-based system in Brex. I think that our employees have really appreciated that kind of new local touch of, hey, like I'm used to, yes, someone could divide by or multiply by 4 to get to shekels, but having employees like feel like, okay, SeatGeek, here's me, and they can do things that fit to our locality, definitely helps. And then similarly on the Deel side, them being our partner to say, hey, in this particular country, this particular perk is covered and has to go through payroll, and it really helps us navigate those types of nuances that someone from a finance org, you would need a finance person, an HR person, and a lawyer, spending all this time trying to recreate the knowledge that they've been able to productize and feed to us, very efficiently and in an automated fashion.
Definitely. Josh, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, kind of to expand on what Teddy just said, I think it's it's incredibly important to make the people who are joining wherever they are in the world feel like they are an equal part of the team, and that's part of that, providing that local experience and providing the same sort of experience that anyone else would get. I think it's really easy for remote or hybrid companies to have someone dotted in another part of the world and them to not feel 100 like they are completely integrated. Yeah, I think both tools here can help with that by providing that local experience, which frankly, me located in Europe, I can't do that, right? I don't know
Totally.
the locals happen.
Yeah, and I think just picking up on a couple things that were said, that's interesting for me. Having been, I was at Brex since the beginning. I've been here for almost 6 years, and as our product kind of evolved from corporate card, and back when I worked at SoFi and I was managing the financial operations there, corporate card was really, it was in expense management. It was really something that was largely concerned with executives and largely concerned with salespeople. Those were the people that were traveling. Those were also the types, to Dan's world and the world that you, Josh, and Teddy live in. Those were typically the kind of people that would be hired in a remote, in a new geography. You'd have like a sales office, maybe, an executive over there kind of building out a presence. Whereas in today's world, you have these tools, these employee-facing tools that, because people are going on offsites and they need a card, the way you talked about, Teddy, because people are hiring employees in, to do software development or marketing or SDR or just different things in other geographies based on talent and cost. You're just having the proliferation of something like a corporate card and expense management or an HR onboarding software touch new types of employees and frankly, more employees. So the stakes for making these decisions are higher because the number of people that are interacting with them is much larger. And so managing the systems is much more complex. And I think that is one of the biggest changes that we're seeing in the environment today. And that's really fueled by the ways that people are working, which is, of course, just as topical. Every time I open LinkedIn, there's some sort of article on remote work and the way that people are working that seems to be capturing the zeitgeist of the moment. And so it's very, very topical that we're having this conversation today. And so with that, I think if Dan, Teddy, Josh, anything that you want to close out with, otherwise I'll turn it over to questions. Looks like we have one, and I think we might get a few more as we do. Okay. So with that, I'll just start with the first question. It's a little tricky to read this, but one of them is, so what capabilities of Brex or Deel have had the biggest impact on your business and how? In example, saving time, increasing compliance, better insights, multi-entity support, et cetera. If you could start, maybe Josh, talking about the capabilities of the two systems we've been talking about today in terms of the biggest impact.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think they both have unique impacts. For Deel, it has definitely been compliance and the ease of onboarding new employees in wherever we want them to be, or wherever they are located. Sorry. And for Brex, it's definitely been implementing like transparent budgeting policies that have been incredibly easy for all of the appropriate parties to see and to have access to. It's been incredibly valuable for us.
Helpful. And how about for you, Teddy?
Yeah, I'll say some things that might seem contradictory, but have actually worked. Where we've gone from a kind of a post-authorization to pre-authorization spend model. So that's harder to do and should take more time. We have provided more clear and transparent budgets to folks and kind of self-serve reporting. We've increased our security environment, and then we've also kind of increased our ability to kind of process expenses more quickly. We have tweaked the system. Right now, we're sitting at about 96% of expenses on our corporate card and reimbursements. with the coding rules come in, code it in a way that we're satisfied with, and we push directly to our ERP. Whereas our system before it was 0%. So with all of that coming together of a more complex and secure and compliant environment, before it took us about 22 hours a month to kind of close the books just on our corporate card program. We can do our corporate card as well as employee reimbursements in about 5 hours per month. And that was just at launch, a few months ago. I think we'll kind of continue to tweak and improve that over time. And we're also doing more. We're doing the FP&A work of authorizing budgets and reporting on that as well, where that was this was more of a accounting function in the spend environment before. So doing more with in less time has been the key win for us.
Helpful, thank you. And then a few other questions that came up. So if you both could talk about a little bit more about automation and time savings, you just mentioned, Teddy. But if you just from a perspective of, what tasks are you able to automate now using these tools, and also how much time, has it saved, if you've been tracking that, Josh, if you could comment there.
Yeah, sure. So with Brex, a huge part has been kind of, it's providing that transparency, but also handing our budgets off to the appropriate members. So previously, for some context, we had a very centralized budget management system, and now we've handed that entire thing off to our department heads, right? And that has saved us probably 2 days a month, I would say, in working time. And then on top of that, it kind of goes together. The connection through our ERP is incredibly powerful, and that saves us at least another day per month. Us and our external accountants in the US, I can only praise it so far. It's been great. And with Deel, I think the key part that has helped in automation is kind of providing those localized contracts and localized terms, right? Like previously, you wanted to hire a contractor or in, X location, and it was quite tedious to find someone to then answer the local labor laws and see if you're in compliance. And having that all handled through Deel is, that's incredibly helpful. Again, we also have that link to our ERP, and so far it's great.
Yeah, interesting. Teddy, anything you wanted to add? I know you spoke a little bit about this.
Speak more on the Brex side and kind of my finance background, but I kind of touched upon kind of 96% of our expenses come in coded exactly how we want to, without any kind of human intervention. And I think that will kind of continue to go up as more kind of AI type products get built into the product. I'd also say that kind of the paradigm shift has been from a kind of reactive after the fact approach to a proactive and more rules and systems based platform. And that's from how we provision and deprovision people, things as soon as an action happens in our HR information system, it kind of cascades directly down into Brex, as well as whenever we hire someone. Okay, if someone's in this cost center, this department, this location, there's a whole series of, okay, well, add them to this budget, give them an individual budget for this. And that's just something we weren't doing before. We'd have a big planning system, a big kind of enterprise grade one, where there might be a line item in the budget that says salespeople travel this many hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. But what Brex is a real kind of that planning system, but also a real operational tool where, for the first time, our FP&A team can both plan for the budget, but also enable people to take real actions and spend real money, and give them kind of a high confidence that that spend is good and compliant. I think on the Deel side, so we launched this year with Deel as well, and I think we've it's early days, but we've been able to I think the reason why we switched over from another company is just do things that we couldn't do before. We're able to directly employ people, which we had to have this kind of arm's length relationship before. The reporting that comes in, much more streamlined, much more detailed, much more self-serve, that we've been really pleased with. And then from the systems that we connect, so for us, it's the upstream is the HR and SSO provider, and then the downstream is things going into our global ERP provider.
Helpful.
And no spreadsheets.
Got it. Josh, want to comment a little bit on reporting systems?
Not really, no.
No worries. And then just last question before we close it out. What has been your experience, Josh, using Deel for obtaining work permits for team members, if any, or Teddy?
We've just kicked off our first one. So if anyone wants to know how it's been in a few weeks, I'll let you know. But yeah.
Same. Same thing.
Dan, any comment on work permits for team members before we close it out? I know that was a question from the audience.
Been a key part of our story. We have a lot of demand from companies wanting us to help with mobility, and we acquired LegalPad earlier this year to help with work permits in North America, and it's becoming quite a big business for us. So we're happy to help.
Helpful. Well, look, first of all, just on behalf of Dan and myself, want to thank you, Josh and Teddy, so much for being here. I know there's a lot going on at this time of year, and it's super helpful to hear for the audience, both live today and then subsequently, your experience using these tools. And just, I think more broadly, right, where there's the way people are working is changing, the tools that they're using is changing, and we all have to keep up with the increasing demands of the marketplace and of the workforce, and make sure that we're compliant and our financial operations are set up for scale as companies continue to expand in new geographies and leverage that global talent pool. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you. And thank you, Dan, for co-hosting this with me. It's been really good, and I always appreciate the partnership from Deel. So thanks so much, and thank you all for joining.